Good morning, everybody. It's morning here with me, and it's morning with Peter in the UK as well. So it's time for another Thursday webinar in the Hub, and I'm really excited today because Peter J Fullagar is joining us to chat about why LGBTQIA+ matters in ELT. This is really a topic that Peter is passionate about and knows a lot about. He's a DEI consultant, so diversity, equity, and inclusion. And he also has a fantastic website with incredible resources. And Peter, I must say, one of the things that I really admire about you and your work is that you always reach out to the people whose stories you're trying to tell in your resources to make sure that you're getting the narrative right and really sharing their lived experience. So huge kudos.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. So yeah, I'm really excited about the session. It's going to be tricky at times. It's not been a good history in ELT or in the world really, but we're going to be optimistic about the future. So over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much. Well, hi everyone. As Teresa said, my name's Peter. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm just thrilled to be here, really. And so huge thank you for allowing me to come in and kind of spread some queer joy, I think. I think it's also important to say that, yes, doing these kinds of things are a little bit nerve-wracking. And I know that a lot of people who do kind of talks like this may get a little bit nervous, and I'm just the same. And I just wanted to say that I have a little stress ball here. It's perfectly fine to have a stress ball, and it's something for me to do with my hands. So I'm going to try and share my PowerPoint. There we are. Excellent, and we can see it. This is great. So as T said, I'm going to be talking about why LGBTQIA+ in ELT matters. It's a hugely important topic for me, and you'll see why as we go through the webinar, kind of why I think it does matter and what I think we can do to make things a little better. So this is my little outline. Very quickly, I'm going to look at what is LGBTQIA+. I'll look at Section 28 in the UK. And just here, I'd like to also acknowledge my privilege. I am a white, cis man who grew up in the global north. If people are unsure what cis means, it's kind of almost the opposite to trans. So being a cis person, my gender identity aligns with what I was assigned at birth. And of course, the opposite there being trans or possibly even non-binary as well. After looking at Section 28, a couple of LGBTQIA global facts. I'll briefly look at a little study called Growing Up LGBT+ and talk about my own experience as well. Then what LGBTQIA+ in ELT is not, what LGBTQIA+ in ELT could be, and then I'm going to look at the how and hopefully show you a couple of examples of my own materials. If time may be another example. Some links and suggestions, and finally, any questions. Although I do realize that it's live and people may be watching on catch up. Of course, please do type in any questions you have as you're watching, whenever time, at a time that suits you, and I'm sure I will come and try and answer your questions. So, what is LGBTQIA+? A lot of people get maybe confused by the long acronym. There are, of course, other letters that can be added, such as 2S for Two Spirit. But a lot of charities, a lot of organizations go with LGBTQ plus or LGBT plus. For me, personally, I like to say LGBTQIA plus, although it is a bit of a mouthful. Other than that, I might say queer. I know that a lot in the community disagree with the use of the word queer because it has such negative connotations as we were growing up. But for me, I have tried to reclaim it for myself. So the LGBTQIA plus community for me includes lesbian, gay people, bisexual people, trans people, queer people. I know a lot of people say questioning. I don't include that in my definition of it. Then we have intersex, asexual, and of course the plus stands for other identities that aren't under the heterosexual umbrella, such as gender fluid and pansexual. So, talking about the UK specifically, because of course that is my experience. And I purposefully chose this image because it kind of represents how I feel about Section 28. Section 28 was brought in by Margaret Thatcher. Thank you, Margaret Thatcher, in about 1988. And I don't know whether you will have seen her possibly infamous speech on education, where she says that she didn't want children to grow up with an inalienable, well, thinking they had an inalienable right to be gay. And this then led to the passing of a law, Section 28 or Clause 28. And in it, it said that a local authority shall not intentionally promote homosexuality or publish material with the intention of promoting homosexuality. It shall not promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. Now, I'm sure we're now in 2023, and I'm sure that you can see that there are a lot of issues with this kind of language, this kind of law. For me, it's the idea of promoting homosexuality. When I think about my materials, I don't promote homosexuality, I represent it, because it is not something to be promoted. It is not something, excuse me, it's not something that can be caught. It is not a pretended identity. It is perfectly acceptable to be homosexual, trans, bisexual, pansexual, polyamorous. I could go on. Now, this was brought in 1988, and you'll see that the dates where it finished, or the dates where it was redacted, was in 2000. This was in Scotland, and 2003 in England and Northern Ireland. I do forget when Wales stopped it. I think it might have been 2000. But that is a whole generation of pupils, of students. And it just so happens that I grew up in that time. So I was born, I know I'm giving away my age, but I don't mind. I was born in 1978. And so I went to primary school between 1985 and 1990. So the end of my primary school years was when Section 28 was enacted. I was in secondary school from 1990 to 1995, and then I had 2 years at college, and then I had 3 years at university, finishing in 2000. So throughout my whole educational career, if you like, there was no mention of homosexuality. There was no visibility of homosexuality. There were no role models of gay people, of lesbians. It just wasn't talked about. And so for me, and I know for a lot of queer people, this led to years after education and through education, years believing that I was completely abnormal because I couldn't see myself in the materials. Somebody like me wasn't talked about. I couldn't see anything showing me that actually I was okay. And this unfortunately stayed with me, and it kind of did affect my mental health for a long time. And it had the effect of years of kind of almost hating who I was. And it only was until maybe about 2004, 2005 that I actually started to realize, well, really, I am okay. I am what they classify as normal. It's just that my identity has been invisible. And it's unfortunate that there are reports that a certain group of people in the UK, at least, want to kind of go back to this kind of education where LGBTQIA plus people, especially trans people, are kind of almost pushed back into the closet, where we are not talked about, where we are not represented, where we are kind of rendered invisible. And there are lots of people, charities, organizations, and me and other individuals within the ELT community who are determined not to let this happen. And this is one of the main reasons why I do what I do. So I said that I would go through a couple of global facts with you. So, as we know, there are many countries where the identity, the very existence of being gay, of being a lesbian, are a criminal act. And the numbers vary depending on which website you look at. The Human Dignity Trust, for example, says 67 countries. I've also seen 70 countries. So I've gone for 69. And in these countries, private, consensual, same-sex activity is against the law. It's illegal. And this is mainly between men. And the charge is unnatural offences. That's what people are charged with. In 41 countries, it's illegal between women. And again, it's private, consensual sexual activity. 11 countries have the death penalty for private, sexual, consensual activity. And this death penalty includes stoning, hanging, lashes, and flogging as well. But as well as that, many people get put into prison for long sentences, and they're also fined for being who they are. Now, of course, I cannot change the law of countries. I'd like to, but it's not something I can do. But by being more representative within our materials, especially in the UK, in the global north, countries where being gay isn't illegal, I think is something that we really need to think about. But as well as that, the trans community are having, in the UK at least, a very negative time of it at the moment. And as a queer man, I always stand with the trans community, and I see them, I validate them, and I support them. But in 14 countries, the gender identity of trans people is also criminalized. And these are mainly known as impersonation laws. So they are criminalized for impersonating another person. Other laws that they might be discriminated against are they might be charged with hooliganism or vagrancy or even public order offences. So in some countries, thankfully not all, our very identity, our very existence is illegal. And there are other countries that have very negative attitudes, especially governmental attitudes, to the LGBTQIA plus community. But how does this affect people in the UK, students in the UK? There is a study called Growing Up LGBT plus, which was commissioned by Just Like Us in 2021. And this study looked at, well, it interviewed 2,934 pupils across the UK. So this included 375 schools and colleges of ages between 11 to 18. And 39% of those students identified as LGBTQIA plus. The main reason for this particular study was to look at the effect of coronavirus and the pandemic on LGBT plus students. However, it also went into a deep dive into educational experiences. And of course, that's what I'm most interested in. For me, these statistics are shocking. They're awful. Considering 2003 was the last time that Section 28 was here. It's 20 years now since that stopped, but yet 17% of LGBT plus students hear negative language about our community every day. Every day. This is not acceptable. Just under half have seen homophobic bullying in their school. Just under half have no positive messaging about LGBT people, LGBT plus identities within their school. And possibly the worst statistic of all is that 68% of young LGBT plus people, students, have contemplated suicide. And this is in comparison to 29%. I mean, 29% is bad enough. It should be zero for everyone. It should be zero for everyone. But yet more than double the LGBT plus students feel suicidal. And so this is something that our government, the UK government, needs to change. And this is something that we as educators can also help to change by representation. So whenever I talk about LGBTQIA plus in ELT, I do get quite a lot of pushback. I'm fairly vocal on social media, and I'm fairly vocal about the discrimination and the prejudice that I receive. Thankfully, it's not on a daily basis, but because I'm becoming more visible with what I do and what I'm passionate about, I do get quite a few negative comments. So let's look at what LGBTQIA plus in ELT is not. So this first one really irritates me. By including LGBT plus people in ELT, it's not a debate on our existence. We exist. We're here. We've been here for just as long as non-LGBTQIA plus people have been here. So whenever I see exercises that question our identity or question our ability to do something because of our identity, that's not right. And that's not something that I approve. It's also not sex education. This doesn't really happen so much with ELT, but in general mainstream education. By incorporating LGBTQIA plus identities within a curriculum or within a resource or within a material, we're not talking about sex. A lot of people on social media say, well, I don't want my son, my daughter to learn about this kind of sex. Well, I don't really want to learn about heterosexual sex. But that's not what's in the materials. That's not what the curriculum is about. The curriculum is about raising awareness of the barriers that we face. It's about utilizing, I'm coming back to that, utilizing us in the world, because we are usual. We are like everybody else. We just love different people. The other thing that LGBTQIA plus education in ELT is not is conversion. You cannot convert somebody to be part of the community. And if this was true, then in theory, I should be a heterosexual man. I'm not. The same thing with LGBTQIA plus parents or families. By having a lesbian mother, by having a gay father, would not make their child gay. My parents were straight, are straight, but yet both me and my sister are part of the LGBTQIA plus community. So debunk that myth. It's also not a taboo, because my life isn't a taboo. My life is usual. I work, I cook, I walk, I do sport, I watch movies. Just being gay is just part of my identity. It doesn't define me as a person. It's also not a political thing, because somebody's identity is not political. I am who I am, to kind of almost quote that very famous song, which I love, by the way. I am not a political person. And the one thing as well that LGBTQIA plus in ELT is not, is it's not visible. And it has been visible probably from the very start. However, there are some examples where people have tried to incorporate LGBTQIA plus identities within materials, but it has been problematic. Let me show you a couple of examples. So if you do a search online for LGBT, ELT, EFL, ESL, you might come across these particular examples. So the first one, on a discussion handout, is it easier for a gay to live in a village or a city? Now, I have a problem with a gay. Gay is an adjective, and it should be used as an adjective. I deeply, deeply dislike a gay. I am not a gay. I am a gay person. I am a gay man. The second one is also problematic. Are there certain jobs that tend to be dominated by gay people? If so, why is that? A little bit stereotypical, and it's also limiting gay people to stereotypical occupations. But I think the third one kind of takes the biscuit a little bit. Do you think that there are any jobs which homosexuals should not be allowed to do? And I think in this particular book, it also says, or it gives an example of a teacher. So it's really diving into a person's very identity, questioning what they should or should not be allowed to do because of that identity that does not define a person. It is one part. It is part of their intersectionality. And then the last one I had to include as well. Would you employ a gay person? Why or why not? Well, firstly, why are you asking about their sexuality in an interview? And why does it matter? Because a gay person is a person. So I hope you can see that I have a few issues with that. But what could LGBTQIA plus in ELT, what could it be? There we are. So I mentioned earlier about usualization or usualized. So I have to reference Sue Sanders here, who is an incredible woman who does such a lot for our community, especially with education. She is the founder of LGBTQ plus History Month UK. And she's also, I'm not sure if she's the founder, but she's very high up in the charity called Schools Out. So usualization, I talked about this a little bit in my 5-minute buzzword talk at the ELT Freelancers Away Day, in comparison with disruption. And for this, I have to credit Tyson Seaburn and his book, incredible book. If you haven't got it, get it. How to Write Inclusive Materials. So usualization in this case is where you are presenting a person and their sexuality or their gender identity just happens to be part of who they are. It's not necessarily focused on, it's not said to be anything unusual or different. It's just a part of who they are. So they're going about their usual everyday life, but they just happen to be bisexual. They just happen to be trans. Disruptive approach, on the other hand, is taking more of an issue-based focus. So this is where people would confront the social issue, such as employment discrimination for LGBTQIA plus people. And this looks more at the truth. This looks more at exploring why marginalization happens. It allows students to be a lot more critical, so encouraging critical thinking. In the examples that I'm going to show you a bit later, I mainly look at the usualization approach, but really, I think a combination of the two is best. And please note that I also don't use normalize. By using normalize, it implies that there is an abnormal, and LGBTQIA plus people aren't abnormal. We are usual. It's also important, as I think you might be able to see by the images on the screen, is to recognize intersectionality. LGBTQIA plus people are Black, they are white, they are disabled, they are non-disabled, they have mental health issues, they are old, they are young, so they have a whole range of identities. And the resources that I try to make, I try to recognize these intersectionalities and I try to represent them. By incorporating LGBTQ LGBTQIA plus people in ELT, it would be a true representation. We're really helping students to see what the world is like. Of course, I can only really talk about the UK, but in the UK, LGBTQIA plus people exist. So they should be represented, they should be seen, they should be heard in materials. But maybe the biggest thing for me is that it would be life affirming. If you think back to section 28, those years in education, my part of my identity was not acknowledged, it was not affirmed. So I felt quite isolated, quite alone. And by showing that LGBTQA plus people exist, that they do watch movies, that they do have families, they do use mobile phones just like everybody else, it would make LGBTQIA plus students feel less alone. They would be validated, they would be seen, and they would be visible. But then, of course, how can we do this? So by including LGBTQIA plus identities in materials, in resources, and in course books. From the work that I do on a DEI perspective, publishers are getting better. They are putting in guidelines. They are making changes to how they work. They are hopefully hiring a more diverse range of teams, of colleagues. This, therefore, should trickle down into the materials to ensure that disabled people are represented, that Black people are represented, that people of Asian heritage, of Indian heritage, of African heritage are represented authentically and not as a stereotype. We can also use supplementary images and materials, especially if we make them ourselves or if we want to kind of add something more to the course book. A lot of the images that I use in this presentation are from the gender spectrum. So this image that you can see here is a trans man from the gender spectrum. And of course, you have to be very careful when looking for images to make sure that the identity that you are presenting is actually the identity that's in the image, because that's it's kind of almost like false advertising. There are materials from LGBT plus History Month and Stonewall, Twinkle, the Proud Trust, LELM Education, Laila El Metwi, and also there are lots of reports that you could use maybe for statistics, for graphs, for IELTS graphs, for example. So there are lots and lots of places where you can get these types of materials. And at the end, I've got a link, I think, to most of these. So let's have a look at some examples, I think. So this is one that I made last year called The Place Where. And this is aimed at kind of B1 plus, B2 level students and looks at relative clauses. So whenever I make a new resource, I don't necessarily think about the vocabulary first. I don't think about the grammar first. I think about who I want to represent, who is missing from my small but growing collection of materials. And in this particular one, I wanted to represent a gay man. And the next slide, I'll show you exactly how I did that. But of course, to have a lead in, you wouldn't be able to tell that this is about LGBTQIA plus identities. And this is one way of utilizing the identity into materials. So I wanted it to be connected to the sea. So I had this lovely image of the sea. These are all free images that you can get from online websites. And I decided to write about a surfer. I don't know whether you can see, the images are quite small. I do apologize for that, but of course you can always download it from my website. I chose to represent a gay, disabled man from Colombia. His identity is usualized. It's not openly said that this is a gay man, this is a queer man. All the text says is he broke up with his partner, whose name was Alberto, decided to move to a bigger city. He's not looking for love at the moment, but if a special man comes along, he'd be open to a new relationship. That's all that the text says about his identity. In this one, I'm also utilizing a limb difference. There's no mention of a limb difference. It's not highlighted as being different. It's not highlighted as being unusual. It's just part of him, part of his identity. And I just decided to go even further and say that his friend Daniela has a wife. Because why not? Women have wives, other people have wives, so why not? And in this way, students will read it, and if they have questions, they might have questions, they might not. I think a lot of young people in this current generation don't necessarily see an issue with LGBTQIA plus people. Like other ELT resources, there's grammar, there's vocabulary exercises, discussion, writing, and research. But the disruptive approach for this particular resource is researching disability and LGBTQIA plus people. So getting students to think critically about the barriers that maybe disabled LGBTQIA plus people face, thinking about where they can get support, kind of highlighting maybe how marginalization happens. So this is just one at a B1, B2 level. One of my earlier ones was this one. And this is at A2 level, looking at past simple affirmative and negative. Again, I wanted to focus on bisexuality in this one, because bisexuality is very much not often talked about, even within the LGBTQIA plus community. So I felt that bisexual people needed to be represented. And I wanted to find out a way that I could do that without being stereotypical or without actually coming out and saying it. So I start off in this one by looking at the life of Sandy and using images for students to try to predict what her life is like. This is then followed with a text where they can read and check their answers and see if they were correct. Then we look at past simple, affirmative, negative, have a couple of grammar exercises, and then we take a look at Sandy's life now. And again, in a similar way, there are images here to demonstrate how Sandy's life has changed. And then there's a gap fill underneath where students have to complete the correct past simple verbs. And in this one, they learn that Sandy and her then boyfriend in the past have split up. She now has a new partner, a wife, and they have an adopted child. Rather than having a rabbit, they have a dog. and they've moved to Cape Town in South Africa. So in a usualizing kind of way, I wanted to present a life, an LGBTQIA plus life, but through the lens of grammar practice. And I think by using this type of resource will allow the identities of LGBTQIA plus people to be represented in a fairly authentic way, to be represented and seen, and to be usualized, really. There are many other exercises on this particular resource. There's no disruptive approach with this particular one. So the writing is to write a short history of a person that they know. It could be themselves, or it could be a friend, it could be a family member. That's fine. It's just to practice past simple. And then the research is to research a famous person and then to give a presentation on that. Again, practicing past simple. So I'm hoping that with these two resources that I've shown you today, you can see how LGBTQIA plus identities can be represented in ELT materials, and how it can be utilized, and how it can be just part of a curriculum. So really, I think I'm doing all right for time. Excellent. No, wonderful. So really, in conclusion, LGBTQIA plus identities can be represented in ELT materials. They deserve to be represented, and they deserve to be heard, and they deserve to be seen, either in a usualized or in a disruptive manner. But really, I think it's best to have a mixture of the two. Hopefully the results of this would be a better understanding of the barriers and the issues that LGBTQIA people face. I would hope that it would reduce prejudice and reduce discrimination. But really, I hope that it would allow people, students, and teachers, because as a teacher teaching in Russia and Japan and in the UK, I was teaching about heteronormative relationships, and of course that wasn't me. So it would allow students and teachers to see themselves, especially students who are maybe questioning themselves, to recognize that they're not alone, that we are valid, we do exist, and we're here. And by representing them, they can hopefully see that. So finally, links and suggestions. There's a lovely QR code here that you can take a picture of, and it should take you to the links page on my website, and it should have a list of LGBTQIA plus educators, resources, suggestions, including most of the ones that I've talked about previously. And also there's a link to my ELT resources shop, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram as LGBTQ in ELT. I've just started experimenting with reels, so yeah, stay tuned for that. And of course you can find me on LinkedIn as well under my name. So really, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in kind of the same period as you, and similarly had absolutely, well, I had no idea of what Section 28 was until you mentioned that you were going to be talking about it in today's talk. And it is really worrying that they're trying to bring back something similar to UK education now.
It is, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there was a petition set up to ban all LGBT content from, I think it was mainly aimed at primary schools. But again, I think there's the misconception that it would be sex education, but it's not. It's just talking about these LGBTQIA plus people exist. So let's look at their life. We don't need to explore the bedroom life of anyone at that age. And I think that is a big, big misconception. However, the petition did fail, and it was rejected by the government. There was also a counter petition as well, which I did sign. But hopefully it's not needed at the moment.
And I mean, I think a lot has changed, you know, in terms of resources being available in mainstream life. Like
Yeah,
you get a lot more stories for young learners, not in English language teaching, but just in general of a wider diversity of characters and narratives
absolutely.
and voices. Yeah.
So the same needs to happen in ELT.
Exactly. We had a couple of lovely comments. Nina said, I will never ever understand how sexual orientation is anyone's business and why people make so much fuss conflict about it. I so don't care about who others sleep with, love. Thank you, Peter, for this webinar. Very interesting.
Thank
And
you.
then later when you were talking about how, you know, just making it a usual part of everyday life, she said her daughter who's 13 wouldn't even care. The young generation is so much more accepting.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what's really, really encouraging, I think, to know that. And I think a lot of it is down to the parents and the parents' accepting attitude for their children, so that the children have a much more open and accepting kind of outlook on life. And I can't thank them enough for that. So thank you.
And do you think that popular culture is having a positive effect on how LGBTQIA plus is viewed? Or is it stereotyping
I
things?
think I think in the early 2000s, I think a lot of it was stereotyped. Um, and I think nowadays we're seeing a lot more people kind of coming out, dressing how they like. For example, Sam Smith. They are a, I think, a really good advocate for the community, especially the non-binary community. But seeing the amount of abuse and discrimination that they face as well, it kind of almost counterbalances the good kind of awareness that they're raising. So I think representation in the media, in TV, film, etc., is getting a lot better. But I do think that the media journalism has a lot to answer for their negative reporting, especially on the trans community. Yeah, yeah, especially with what happened last week on Saturday in Warrington. There's been a lot of very, very negative and harmful things said that affect the trans community. So there's still a long way to go. But we will get there, and I feel very optimistic and positive. Hurrah!
Yes, that's it. That's what we need to do, a bit more moving away from kind of too much anodyne positivity. Life is great in ELT, but being optimistic about the future
Yes.
of it.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Peter. I'll share the resources. I'll share the links as well, just in case people are watching on their phones. And I don't know if you can snap a QR code when you're on your phone, but I'll share the resources anyway.
I think, yeah, I think if you go with your camera and then it comes up and says Chrome or whichever browser you use, and then you can go there. I'm going to be using a lot of those in my IATEFL talk.
Fantastic. Yes, so you're speaking on the same topic at IATEFL, and also you've got a British Council webinar coming up later in the year as well.
I will. And yes, the IATEFL one is going to be different to this, but on a similar topic. It's called I Am Not a Taboo, LGBT plus in the ELT classroom. That's what it's going to be.
Excellent. So if anybody's going to IATEFL, check out Peter, and we'll share links to the British Council webinar when it's available as well.
Lovely.
Great. Well, have a fabulous day, week, whatever you're up to.
I will. And you as well.
Thank you very much. And everyone, I'm back again next Wednesday. I've got so many fabulous folks to chat to in the hub. So I'll be back again next Thursday, not Wednesday, next Thursday with another webinar. So have a great week, and I'll see you all then. Thanks again, Peter.
Thank you. Bye.